My name is Jenny, and I had breast cancer. And during that time of having breast cancer, I've always been an artist and had art things. My mother is an artist also. But that part of life that you can't use words for and you can only feel, I feel like art for recovery really encapsulates that moment in a visual field, and I needed that to have a deeper understanding of what I was going through.
And what were you going through? What was your diagnosis?
Well, at that time it was like stage 2. But it was quite big. I named him Gerard Depardieu because I think you should name your tumor. And he was kind of like a large, but not in charge. And and it was triple negative. So that, finding all this out through the cancer world was hard to understand. It was triple negative. And at 32, they said like it had been growing for 7 years. So the reality that I had probably had cancer in me since I was 25 was a lot to think about and cope with at that time. And all the different treatment options, because I was so young, I didn't know if I should get a mastectomy. And I did genetic testing at that time, and the gene had not been unlocked enough and came back negative. So I made decisions at that time thinking that I had a negative BRCA gene. But then 2 years later, they unlocked more of the gene because science is always working. And it turns out I did have the BRCA gene. So, I would have made maybe different choices, but things roll out as they do.
Jenny, were you doing art before your diagnosis and then through your treatment and surgeries?
Yes, I did art before, but it was more like classes and schools and things. During treatment, I painted my whole house like cake colors because I had a lot of energy from the steroids and the thought that I was just going to lay fallow. Like before I had cancer, I'd already had illnesses with endometriosis. I'd already had 1 ovary removed and like 3 pelvic surgeries. So I knew what illness was. And I knew that it was just like a dearth of time that you had to get through on some level. And so I had started painting my house, and I actually completed that during having cancer just because I could not sit still. So,
what is your medium of choice today?
What is my medium of choice today? For some reason, I really got into drawing and doing charcoals like the past 2 or 3 years I've been doing charcoals. Before that, I did a lot of paper sculptures, and I love costuming. Like, if there is even a nuanced idea that you should dress up, I will be there with a crown or something I made for my hair. Like, I love immediacy of art and, like, just doing it for that night. Like, I think that's really important to just treasure that moment. And, like, a good costume is only one day. It's so good. Like, you can't redo them. I have been in this life dynamic for 20 years. It's not, and I think that's the hard, it's hard to explain if you haven't lived within this, that for 20 years, it's not like you had cancer, then everything ended, and you just went back to your normal life. Like, I've had lymphedema that is not funded. I have a lot of dental issues from treatment. I have a fake teeth right now. And I had the breast cancer, but then I learned I had the gene, and clearly my ovaries were no good. So then I had my other ovary removed. I've had a hysterectomy, and then this past June 12th, I have had the DIEP procedure, which is deep. Anyway, it's amazing. They take your stomach fat and move it to your breasts, and then they just like sew you up, and you have new breasts with no nipples at the moment. But the reality is because of radiation, I have a hole in my chest right now. Like, it's like this big, and it's like a big raw hole. So although I look fine and I'm living in this world as a well person, the reality is I got a big problem right now, and it's like, but the daily of it is not that life-stopping, but kind of it's hard to feel like I'm not healing. I can't change this. So that's hard.
How do you feel like living with this for 20 years has kind of changed maybe the way that you thought your life was going to go?
I had a really strong family history of breast cancer. So it was always something in the family. Like, it was something all the women were scared of. So like before I had cancer, I'd had these ovary problems. And I think that really made me like realize that, first of all, my ovary problems and my endometriosis was misdiagnosed as psychiatric issues for the 4 years before that, and I was put on all these psychiatric drugs to really nullify and mute me. So then I learned that these was actually endometriosis. I thought, well, who am I going to listen to next? No one. And I chose then at that point to invest. I went as a nanny. I was like a good girl. And I was like, oh, what would I truly desire? And I chose sex work for the next endeavor. So I was doing sex work before that. And I think having that illness and realizing that like, this is my life, for all the mistakes and all the good stuff and all the bad stuff, I get to choose. And so going into cancer, I was like, well, this makes sense that this next part of life, I get to choose too. Like, I'm making all the decisions. So I think cancer really focused me on that idea. And before I had cancer, I've always been dyslexic. I have like a shame-ridden writing style. And I didn't write at all because I was so tired of people telling me what was wrong with my writing or how it didn't work or I wasn't spelling this right. And I didn't write at all. But then after having cancer, I was like, well, that's the worst thing that can happen. Someone's not going to think I spell right. Like, I've had cancer. Like, that's the big problem here. So I started writing a lot more, and I wasn't afraid of any critique or feedback because it was kind of like, I've been through something much worse than someone thinking that I can't spell right. So I think that really changed my faceted self around writing was the biggest development.
How do you feel your writing or your art making or your outfits, your creative expression helped you heal during that time, actually through your life, it sounds like?
Because it helps you live in the day. Because it is overwhelming, like to think, oh my goodness, I have to pay for lymphedema, for my teeth, for all these life parts. And like, what do I have control of? I have control of what I'm going to wear, how my makeup is, nails. And so it gives me an everyday outlet of creativity that it's about the immediacy of the moment. Like, you're not going to do it later. You're not going to wear that outfit later, You're going to wear it now. And so it's kind of like some people get up and journal or do like a daily drawing. I'm like, if I'm feeling myself or feeling well, like, well, I better dress as large and like colorful as I want because what's the downturn of that? Nothing, Except being a little cold in San Francisco. It happens.
How did they find your cancer?
I found my cancer. I was in Mexico with my girlfriend, and I was laying on my side, and just like, oh, what a beautiful beach, feeling my breast, and I felt this hard lump, and I was like, I knew what it was. There was no doubt in my mind that this was cancer. I, went in immediately, and because I had already had so many ovary issues, no one was like, this can't be. So I immediately, got treatment, or I think, I didn't have to convince anyone this might be cancer. Like, it was like, and then when I showed them how to feel it, everyone felt it.
Okay, so if you could go back in time to your 32-year-old self who just found that lump, who was just told this is what is about to happen to you, what would you say?
That's a hard one. What would I say? That you're doing a great job, first of all. Don't like the dynamic of pathologizing you because your discontent is going to be a lifelong issue. So don't think you're the wrong person. It's probably the larger, it's the larger medical system. So, I think about that. And I think about that 32-year-old self and how strong she was. Because I sat and I looked and I thought sexuality is so important to me, my sexual self, that here I am, I'm going to be taking, they took my last ovary up at the first cancer at 33. And then I'm taking estrogen on top of it. It's like I'm battling two different things. And so, I went through a lot of appointments where they were like, statistically, you're making a negative choice. And I kept thinking, I don't live in statistics. I am not a statistic. I don't know where I'm going to fall in the line of statistics.
What do you feel like the public, just people should know about maybe they have a friend or a loved one who has long-term cancer side effects? Like what would you say and not say?
I would not. The thing that no person who's lived through cancer experiences want to hear is, "Oh, you don't feel well again?" You're right. I don't feel well again because you already know you are again. I think that, and do not like. Here's things that I do not want to hear one more day. My aunt had cancer. You know what? Everybody knows somebody that's had cancer, and then they're kind of redirecting the conversation. Also, during this situation, which I am living in now, it's amazing how many people have concerns for me that I have not thought of. Like, what about your nipples? Because I don't have any nipples right now. And I'm like sitting there thinking, that is like low on the list of problems I've got going on. And so I really see that people often bring their own fears and worries into the conversation and then kind of plant them on you. And then you're supposed to enact this like cycle where you're worried about what they're worried about, yet taking care of yourself. So I think the response is, I am so sorry to hear this. What else, and then just be quiet. Let the other person talk. Sometimes you have to be in these doctor's appointments. It was like harsh and a little chaotic, but that's not who I am in my entirety. And so like I'm trying to give myself grace for that because that's, not the moment that I want to live in. So, it's hard to say what I've learned throughout this time. I will say that I have, like, as hard as being in the cancer community is because people die. Like, your friends die, and that is a terrible sadness, I have learned so much from every person that I've met through, like, the cancer community and especially Art for Recovery because I look at that and I think Art recovery works best for me emotionally because we're all artists people on the whole and we're like having our lives doing art and we can see those our artist selves reflected and then we're like supportive over one issue, cancer. So I really appreciate that and I feel like I've learned a lot about myself, but I've learned about how people live and how, people live through so much. There's a woman, Emerald, that still touches my soul just because, like, I think, she had cancer and I'm, hopefully can live to the age of Emerald. But she was just so funny. But, like, she would tell me things about growing up as an Irish queer youth and it was heartbreaking. But at the same time, she lived through that too, Think about all the people I've met through this and how maybe life would have been easier or different, but it would not have been as rich and as encompassing as it is. So after I had cancer at 33, I was single and I, was like, well, and I'm a queer woman. And so I started dating someone and I would have these lists of questions like, do you drink? Do you not eat meat? Like I was so determined to get someone that didn't have like commingling health issues. So I met this perfectly healthy person and then they got tongue cancer, which is very cruel. So then I was in a double cancer couple and I took care of her for 2 years. And living through that, with her, like taught me the preciousness of every day and that I think about things like that I take for granted. I don't take for granted now. Like after she had her tongue surgery, we never had an argument really because she didn't have the energy to talk. So like being in a relationship now and sometimes like all we do is argue and I'm like, and we're so lucky we can do that. Like we still can communicate with our mouths. It's amazing. So, being in that with her and she also went to a experimental treatment in Germany. So I had an international flare and like seeing everybody there had cancer problems and there was a last hope and I also saw that everybody had someone that they loved there. Everybody wanted to stay alive so hard, and just being in that experience and it not working, like to be in those cruxes of moments when you're with someone and they say no more treatment is working and going through the hospice with her and she died in hospice. It just taught me like that, like living in the today. Like I think about that I never expected to be with someone that died from tongue cancer. So it's just really hard to understand that complexity of life because it was so rare. She was so healthy, but I think it's made me a lot. I think that more than my own cancer has changed me because it was so hard for her to be alive like every day. Yet she wanted to be, you know? So days when I'm feeling like, oh, I can't cope, I'm like, yeah, but at least you can argue. You know, you still have the mouth to argue with. And like, actually, I don't have a good stomach. I have pancreatitis. And so like, I can't eat all these foods. But she couldn't eat for the last 2 years of her life. So like, you know, things get taken away in cancer. And it's like a slow little nibble of your life. Like, I don't really go out to dinner with friends because it's hard to explain. I don't really eat a lot of the same things. So I think the experience with Sarah and loving her and also realizing that her life was so remarkable because I feel like she kind of became the self that she needed to be to die. And that was an amazing thing to watch, you know, and to be present with. And I'll always miss her. And I always think of her. That will never change.
Very curious, because I know I've experienced your creative process, but I want you to talk about it a little bit, about the characters, the colors, the themes that you've kind of created over the last 20 years to tell your story, to share those things that you can't with words. Yeah, do you want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, I guess, yes. So the ways that I've kind of, you know, had like a creative outlet is right after I had cancer treatment, I have a picture where I felt like a lab rat. Like, you know, at 33, they're just like, oh, we don't know what's going to work, but we're just going to throw things at you. So like I had a little mouse costume that I would wear at parties for a while because people would be like, what happened to you? And you'd be like, oh, I became a mouse. I became a lab rat. You know, like instead of being I had cancer, because that's a very boring story. So that, like, it's hard to think about certain without looking at, like, pictures. But my process is that, like, I don't think too much about the outcome of, like, I don't ever have an idea of what I want this to look like. I'm very much into the process. So I'm like, okay, you don't know what the end product is, but, you know, right now I have to find, you know, 52 bottle tops that are pink. I'm like, okay, that's the week's project. And so, like, you find the things and then you set aside time, like, you know, because people always like, oh, I just threw this together. That is a lie. I sat and I thought, okay, 4 hours here, 4 hours here, 4 hours here. And then you spend time and you make the time, or you create the time, like, kind of sack. And then whatever happens in your process during that time is what was supposed to happen. And there's no going back. My mom, the cruelty of the art teacher is you got one piece of paper and you didn't get another piece. Like, you cried, doesn't matter, turn it over. So, like, that's kind of how I make things too. Like, I never start over or redo something. I'm like, oh, the glue's not holding, or wow, an armature like would have helped. Or, you know, these wings are really kind of big. Like, oh, now you're a vulture. You know, like, you just kind of keep going on the story. So I think that is a process point, and I get really lost in it. Like, I can see that my brain, like the neurochemistry of creation, is really big in my brain because I will definitely, I'll come into art and I'll like have a headache and my neck hurts. And then like in the middle of it, and I have not taken any like pain meds, in the middle of it, I'm like, that's not the problem. And then at the end, I'm like, my neck doesn't hurt. And I know that I'm like chemically changing my brain to be calmer and to not be as responsive to like every pain signal that's coming in. So I see that that is a very cohesive way that I've learned how to like make my brain okay in not okay circumstances. And then you get an outfit out of it. And then like you go to the party and everyone's like, wow, you look great. And you're like, man, I'm really calm. Like, you know, like, I know I'm a little overdressed. It's good.
So. What about your writing?
Well, yeah, I definitely have been in the writing community and have had things published, both as a person who's had cancer and as a person who works in sex work. I think that writing about sex work, people don't at all because it doesn't get published because it's considered sexual. Even if you're telling a story that's rather mundane, just by having it under the oeuvre of sex work, it is always seen as sexual. So, like, I think as I've done more writing, I've realized that that my stories make people really uncomfortable, and it has to be held with the right group, because often I go into a writing group and people are very much focused on like this one idea of what sex work is, or like living after cancer, and like sexuality doesn't cut off the minute that you get sick. Like, I really understand that you're a sexual person, you deserve to feel good about your body.
How has it been for you having cancer and being in the queer community?
Having this whole redo, I think I really looked at it and I'm like, what am I willing to go for breasts? Like, why am I so focused on, and I did wait 20 years between the first cancer and right now. So it wasn't like I rushed into anything. Why do I want breasts still? Breasts, why are breasts important to me? And I realized is that for me as a queer woman, as a femme woman, that like I need a visual identifier as a femme woman. And the nails, the hair, I know they're pretty good on the identifiers, but having breasts, it's like it makes me know that I am still able to choose my identity, and it's not being chosen for me. And a lot of people don't have reconstruction and are flat, and I think I would feel, for me, I would have felt so sad every day waking up and thinking, I have to dress this body. I don't even like it. I don't even like, right now, yes, there's an open hole, but, just decorate it. Like, I've already, already I feel like I'm okay. If these are the breasts that I'm going to have, I feel like as a femme woman, this is reflective of who I am. So that has been important to me.
So I usually say like, okay, if you were a color today, what would you be? But in your case, I kind of want to ask, if you were a palette today,
Yeah.
what would you be?
Okay, that's a better one. All right, so I am, a palette person. And right now, I think I am digging deep into like these purples and these like really hot purples and pinks. So I'm going that way. Purples and pinks for right now, like very vibrant. I saw a woman on the bus today and I was like, oh, I want to be like her when I get old. She had like 4 different kind of outfits on. Her main color was purple, but she had good patterns on, and she had a piercing up here, and like she just looked wonderful. And I thought, I like that. So it was nice to see.
Do you feel like there's anything else that you really want the medical community, the cancer community, just the world, people to know about you, about your story, that you feel like is important?
I think what I would want people to take away is that every story is unique and every diagnosis is unique, and no one is a statistic. Like, you have to make the decisions for yourself. Like, the medical world doesn't know your outcome. Like, no one knows your outcome, but you are committed to live with yourself in this body every day. And whatever you need to do to get through that, you should do, because no one else is going to do it for you. No one else is going to be there at midnight saying, you look really miserable. What can I do? It's you, So I think that's an important thing to realize, is that ultimately you're responsible for your own self. And if you have to make decisions that make other people uncomfortable, just do it. They'll live with themselves too. My name is Jenni, and I love Art for Recovery.